The public generally expect the police to be taking action.
You, Colin Brown, are causing a problem today. We're going to take your vehicle off you. Everybody else can carry on doing what they're doing perfectly legitimately.
Following that seizure, I'll be very supportive of the disposal of those vehicles, generally by crushing.
Many of you may be aware that there's a crime and policing bill working its way through Parliament at the moment. There was recently an evidence session at which some police and crime commissioners gave evidence, one of which being Matthew Barber, who is the Police and Crime Commissioner for the Thames Valley police area. I thought I would give Matthew a call to see whether or not he'd be prepared to discuss with us the provisions in this bill and whether or not they are likely to have any significant impact on motorcycle theft. So this is an interview I recorded with him earlier this morning. I thought it would be useful just to speak to you directly to find out from your perspective what kind of provisions are in this bill that you think may or may not actually improve the outcome for our audience, which is motorcyclists. I'm keen to hear what you think the provisions in the bill will actually, how that will actually play out for motorcyclists.
Simon, I think there's some really good provisions being set out in this bill, actually. Some of it which is tidying up loopholes which existed previously, some of which is new ideas which are going to need new money. And part of my case of the committee is it's all very well government wishing things to happen, but you've got to put money into them. But there's plenty of stuff in there that doesn't need cash. It's just about changing the rules and empowering police officers. So I think that's a good thing. Obviously, without going into any detail, there's lots of good stuff that will protect us all anyway. And of course, whether you're a motorcyclist or not, we all want to live in a safer world. So all that stuff that tackles reducing shoplifting and some of those other bits of offending in our town centres are good things for everybody. But specifically for motorcyclists, I think there's two areas to look at. One is around dangerous and antisocial use of vehicles, which will obviously cause a risk to legitimate users of those vehicles, but also, let's be honest, damage the reputation of those people who ride safely when a minority acts badly. But also the big issue that we've spoken a lot about before, Colin, obviously, which is theft of motorcycles. So I think there's provisions for both. In terms of the theft, there is some new legislation proposed, which probably does a little bit more around motor cars, but I think will still be helpful. So it's looking at electronic devices that are used in the theft of motor vehicles, which are currently clearly illegal to use to steal a vehicle, but possessing them, selling them online is not currently an offence. So the police might be at someone's property, see they've got this kit which can only be used to steal vehicles, yet having that is not an offence. So that will change, and I think that will be helpful. But another thing which I think is really important for motorcyclists, because obviously we're talking about smaller vehicles which are relatively easy to transport and may well be tagged with things like Apple AirTags and other devices are available. There's a huge amount of frustration, I think, often from victims now, where they might have tagged an item of property. They can see where it is, and they'll say to the police, "But I know that my bike is in there. Can you go and do something about it?" And they're hugely frustrated when the police often will say no. And the reason for that is that under current legislation, having that Apple AirTag or similar isn't generally considered to be strong enough grounds to enter property. You'd need to go and get a search warrant to do that. This new legislation will allow the police to enter premises where you've got electronic tracking devices that identify there may be stolen property. So if you've got your bike tagged, it's going to be much easier for the police to track down, not just in terms of physically tracking it down, but actually giving the police powers which they don't have at the moment in order to enter property.
There's an awful lot of mention about this relating to mobile phones and things like that. But obviously it's important to point out that this does cover things like tracking devices like the AirTags and such like. Does that also include the more factory-fitted trackers and alarm systems that are on motorcycles? That covers any of these sort of devices, does it?
Yeah, I believe as worded, and obviously it's still got to take its passage through Parliament, but as worded, my take is that it would encompass all of those things. So whether it's factory fitted, whether you've stuck an AirTag to it somewhere, or whether it's inbuilt like it is on your mobile phone, then if you can if you can prove with some level of accuracy that your property is somewhere it shouldn't be, the police will then have the powers to enter without having to get a search warrant, which again is one of those things. It doesn't cost us any more money. It just empowers police officers to do what the public would probably expect them to already, but they didn't previously have the power to do so.
When it comes to the antisocial use of motorcycles, you've got the increased powers around the antisocial behaviour, specifically around seizing of vehicles. Can you just talk us through what exactly is being said there?
And in short, this effectively just means removing the warning. So at the moment, it is an offence under existing legislation to use a motor vehicle in an antisocial fashion. Clearly, there's other legislation which comes into stuff that is dangerous. But often this is, although there may be some danger involved, this is often the stuff that is considered to be antisocial. So it might be excessive noise. It might be stuff that goes on often in private car parks. People pulling wheelies and doing donuts and some of those things in dangerous locations often can be quite intimidating for other road users and residents as well. The current legislation allows the police to warn someone under existing antisocial legislation, and if they are warned a second time, if you like, they're caught second time within 12 months, that vehicle can be seized. But often what happens is someone will get a warning, they will cease and desist on that occasion, and they'll go down the road and do the same thing again, or they'll come back the next week. And of course, if the police don't catch them again, there's no effective sanction. This will allow the police to seize vehicles there and then. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that every vehicle will be seized, but it does allow the police that power so they can rapidly escalate. And when we've certainly seen plenty of issues in Thames Valley, largely with cars, but certainly with some use of motorbikes, and also, of course, you've got those illegal motorbikes, effectively push bikes that have often been modified. There's a whole category now of vehicle which is falling between the definition of a legal road motorbike and a push bike which doesn't need to be licensed. That's a growing challenge for the police to deal with, and I think this is part of the legislative package which will help to deal with that. Clearly, those vehicles are illegal to use anyway on the road, but this is just another tool by which the police can simply seize at that early point, and I think that is a power I hope to see the police using more of once it's in place, but using it effectively, of course. It's not, doesn't mean we're going to seize everything that's out there, but that rapid escalation, I think, is really important.
Obviously, there are some concerns around the motorcycling community with the what we've seen in terms of attempts to deal with car cruising, as it's often referred to, with injunctions, which I think many riders fear would impact them if they were carrying out legitimate, charity runs and things like that, where you've got a large number of bikers riding together on a group run. Do you think that this change in the legislation will mean that they replace things like these injunctions? Will they have a similar impact to those injunctions? And I suppose in some respects, should motorcyclists be worried that legitimate riding could potentially be viewed as antisocial by the wrong person, and the motorcycle be seized at the side of the road with no recourse to justice, shall we say?
No, I think people should be generally reassured by this, because I think the legitimate road users are as frustrated as everybody else by those who use the roads badly and often endangered by them. And you're right. Sometimes the reputation of cyclists, motorists, and motorcyclists can all be ruined by a minority of those groups who behave badly. So I think this actually is really helpful, because it allows the police to take action in a reasonable and even-handed way. There are still plenty of safeguards in place that would be there, but I think we certainly, from a policing perspective, haven't used the injunction route in Thames Valley. Clearly local authorities may well seek to do that, and that's sort of out with my remit. But I certainly think that this is a route that will allow the police to focus on those worst offenders, and it's, in fairness, an approach we've taken around some of the car meets, where actually, although it might frustrate some people, It's not illegal to meet and show off your cars in the same way that it's not illegal to have some of these organised rides for motorcyclists. Neither should it be. But what you want to be able to do is pick off the individuals who are causing problem and impacting on everybody else around them. And I think this is much better targeted legislation which will allow the police to go in, and whether it's a motorbike or a car, to say, no, you, Colin Brown, are causing a problem today. We're going to take your vehicle off you. Everybody else can carry on doing what they're doing perfectly legitimately, rather than the blanket approach of an injunction which impacts on everybody. Obviously, the Colin Brown we all know and love wouldn't do that. But yeah, I think that targeted approach is much more effective.
I suppose one other question that comes to my mind is obviously a lot of the antisocial riding, where you get groups of youths pulling wheelies through the town centre and such like. This very often turns out to be that they're using a stolen motorcycle. So simply seizing that motorcycle is not going to be a punishment for them. They're just going to use that as a motivation to go and steal another. If the bike was being seized, would that be done in isolation, or would there be further charges brought against the individual? Because I think that would be an area of concern, that yes, we might actually be fueling more motorcycle theft if we take the bikes that have been stolen away from the criminals, and they then use that as justification to steal more.
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly, if you've got a vehicle that's been reported stolen and it's being used antisocially, I would be expecting the police, yes, to seize that, to return it back to its rightful owner, and to make an arrest for the theft. So actually, you've got two offences potentially going on there. One arguably much more serious around the theft of the bike. So no, this shouldn't be used as a substitute for that. Of course, it may well be that that at the time the police are dealing with, they may not know that bike has been stolen. In which case, seizing it will at least allow it to be returned to its rightful owner in due course. But no, I mean, it's something we've discussed before. We are seeing vehicle crime in Thames Valley, both theft of and theft from, reduce, I think, by 16% in the last year. But I'm putting in place a wider strategy, and we're doing some work at the moment that includes specifically looking at motorcycle theft within that category, because although we are seeing a downward trend, I'm not sure that we really understand what's driving all of that in Thames Valley, and I want to make sure that we are looking at what preventative measures we can put in place around all those different types of vehicle crime. So yeah, I think it's a helpful tool, but no substitute for simply nicking people who are out there stealing bikes.
What level of impact do you think that this legislative change will have? Will it be the silver bullet that solves the problem? I suspect the answer is no, but I'll let you get the chance to answer that. And I suppose if you were doing sort of like totally blue sky thinking, what would be the thing that you would say would have the biggest impact when it comes to dealing with motorcycle specific theft and antisocial riding? What do you think you would be asking for if you had, the ability to ask for anything and receive it?
Yeah, well, if I ruled the world. So I think in terms of will this solve all of our problems? No, it won't. I think it's a really helpful step forward. I think the legislation, for example, around antisocial use of vehicles is really helpful. And we are increasing the number of officers we've got in neighbourhood policing. In Thames Valley, we'll have more frontline officers, but we still need to have a police officer there to see stuff happening, to actually take action. And of course, when things are happening, when things have happened in the recent past, we're able to go and see someone's vehicle. Perhaps there's some CCTV footage of someone driving in antisocial fashion. You can go and seize it after the fact. But if it's happening there and then, that in and of itself can be quite a dangerous situation, both for the police and for the person committing the offence. So we need to be realistic about how the police are going to stop that. Do we want a load of high-speed pursuits on our roads, dealing with individuals who are driving dangerously? No, that's probably not a good route for anybody. So actually, I think it's much more likely we will see people's vehicles being seized after the fact more frequently. So I think that will have an impact on people who are riding and driving badly, and I think that's good for everybody. But it's not going to be a panacea. In terms of what we would like to see in terms of managing the theft, I think what we're going to start seeing, hopefully, in other areas around vehicle manufacturing is about not just tracking. We've talked about the trackers. I think mandatory fitting of tracking or at least much wider fitting and tracking devices by manufacturers, I think would be really helpful. If nothing else, if they're fitted by manufacturers, and you know they are, and criminals seek to remove those, then that's a bit of a red flag when you go to buy one, isn't it? If the vehicle you're buying doesn't have that technology fitted, so of course anything can be circumvented by criminals, but making it mandatory makes that a lot tougher. And similarly, there's some legislation in place which it's on the statute book but hasn't been enacted by the new government yet around plant and machinery, thinking particularly around farm machinery. But there's no reason why it couldn't apply to motorcycles, which is that it would require manufacturers to forensically mark their machinery as well as using trackers. So trackers are great because you can, if you like, track them at distance. Forensic marking is just as good, if not better, because it will really provide, if you like, evidence through the criminal chain about where things have been and where they've come from, and it's much more difficult, if not impossible, to remove. So I think the more we can do in that, because it will bring criminals to justice who are out there committing offences at the moment, but will also provide a deterrent effect, because once you know that as time passes, the majority of bikes out there in the marketplace have both trackers and forensic marking, it becomes a much tougher item to want to steal. Of course, that will take time. We're not in that place yet, and you do need to have older bikes work through and the new ones to fill the marketplace. But why shouldn't we be ambitious and seek to move towards that? Because criminals will use technology to their own ends, and we should be making sure we try and stay that one step ahead.
Do we know how soon this bill is likely to get royal assent and these powers actually become, part of the toolbox for the local police?
So I'm not sure what the government's timetable is. I think it will be later this year. It's still going through its committee stage at the moment. That will take another few weeks. I expect the government will want to get this passed and with royal assent, but as so often happens, once something gets royal assent, it doesn't mean that the legislation kicks in straight away. There's often trigger points where the Home Office can, if you like, activate things later on. So I would like to think by the end of this calendar year would be a good place for us to see some of these things come into force.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure, thank you.
So what do you think of the provisions in the Crime and Policing Bill? Will they have a major impact on motorcycle theft? Or is it simply a case that the police do not have the resources to use those powers once they have them? Please let us know what you think in the comments below. And of course, if you think the work MAG is doing to help tackle motorcycle theft is of use, why not actually support us by taking out a full MAG membership? You can join online at www.mag-uk.org.